He'd moved to the desert to reinvent himself.
He wanted to get out.
His past life wouldn't follow him there.
He could leave everything behind and have a fresh start.
In the process, he found love.
I'm Shanice.
He's really attracted to her.
Nice to meet you.
She had a beautiful smile.
This was the person he could start his new life with.
But he would never get the chance.
The neighbors heard multiple gunshots.
The apartment's riddled with bullet holes.
She found him in a pool of blood.
Had his past finally caught up with him?
He had been going from that life for several years at that point.
There's no getting out.
Or was passion to blame?
When I heard that, I was astonished.
It's just shocking. It's heartbreaking.
He didn't deserve to die that way.
February 10th, 2006. 29 Palms, California. It's a cool and quiet morning in this desert oasis, an hour east of Los Angeles.
It's kind of secluded. There's not a lot of people there. The biggest attraction in the town would be the Joshua Tree National Park.
The town is also home to the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center military base.
At 11 a.m., 21-year-old Shanice Bailey has just arrived at the home of her boyfriend, 28-year-old Lewis Kimball.
Lewis,
She hadn't been able to get a hold of him all morning and was starting to become concerned.
are you in there?
But outside Lewis's apartment, Shanice makes an alarming discovery.
The window was shattered.
Shanice uses her key to open the front door, but once inside, her worst fears are realized.
Oh my God, Lewis!
She found him lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
It was the most horrifying way she could have found him.
Lewis!
Lewis was completely unresponsive, so Shanice immediately called 911.
Yes, I think my boyfriend is dead. Please send somebody now.
28-year-old Lewis Kimball never had it easy.
Lewis grew up in Westmont in South Central Los Angeles. It's a poverty-stricken area.
They call it Death Alley because there's so many murders in that area.
Lewis often found himself lacking stability growing up.
He moved a lot. He was really just bouncing around. There was times that he would live with an aunt. Maybe he would live with his mother.
But Lewis ended up finding his real home on the streets.
Lewis kind of fell into the gang culture and became, very, very involved in the gang life. He dropped out of school. He was on a pretty destructive path.
He felt as though no one cared about him. He didn't see the need to go to school.
It's almost like it's a rite of passage in that area. The youth, especially the male youth, looked up to these gang members because that's their family. The way things work in LA gangs is you have to put in work. So you have to hit a lick. You have to, do certain things to prove yourself.
Lewis racked up many drug offenses just to show them that he was really down.
You want that street credibility. It's just life. There's no getting out of the gang. Once you're in, you're in.
But to those who knew Lewis best, like his friend Candace Hicks, there was much more to him than his tough exterior.
He liked to give off the impression that he was tough. He had this sort of bop when he walked, but he was really funny. He was a prankster, and he was a real sweetheart.
Lewis was also known for his intelligence.
A lot of people think that men or boys who are in gangs are idiots. They're dumb. They dropped out of school because they couldn't hack it. And he was very smart. Even though he was in this gang, I knew his true potential.
When Candace decided to go away to college, Lewis was inspired to make a change in his own life.
I got into college.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God, Candace, that's what's up. Ooh, doing it.
I went to school for pre-med, and he was really happy about that. He was proud about that. I think that watching me do it watching me be the proverbial rose that grew from concrete, it inspired him, at least momentarily, to do something different.
You know, maybe one day I'll get out of here too, son.
Yes, look, I believe in you. You've always been ambitious, so.
Thanks.
In 2003, Lewis left South Central Los Angeles and the gang life behind.
Lewis tried to turn his life around. He moved to 29 Palms.
Lewis was really looking forward to start his life over and, just start something new, something positive.
He enrolled into a continuation school in order to finish high school.
So he eventually decided to get his diploma and just really get away from the gang life.
For Lewis, the remote location was perfect because no one would ever find him there. He was hoping to leave his criminal past behind and get a new fresh start at life.
Lewis was even able to make a fresh start at love.
After moving to 29 Palms, Lewis went on a few casual dates, but none of the relationships lasted.
Until he met 21-year-old Shanice Bailey after connecting with her online.
I'm Lewis. Nice to meet you.
She was beautiful, she had a beautiful smile. I mean, he just was really attracted to her, just drawn to her personality, and he was quickly taken by her.
You want something to drink?
Yeah, sure. Martini, please.
Martini for the lady.
They just had this immediate connection.
She was charming and down to earth.
So, do you ever miss LA?
Why? I got everything I need right here.
Before long, the two were inseparable.
And he thought this was the person he could start his new life with.
Instead, Shanice would be the person who found Lewis.
Lewis, are you in there?
In the most horrific condition.
She is not able to contact Lewis, so she decides to, pay him a visit. To her surprise, she finds a boyfriend.
Oh my God, Lewis!
In a pool of blood.
When first responders arrive, it's clear there's no hope for Lewis.
At this point, he was dead on the floor.
It's just as obvious that police have a homicide on their hands.
The cause of death was gunshot wounds.
The walls are riddled with bullet holes.
To detectives, it looks like a classic gang-related hit.
Former gang member Lewis Kimball had left his troubled life in South Central LA behind for a fresh start 140 miles away.
Lewis settled on 29 Palms, a small town in the desert.
It was secluded. It was somewhere where he could just really start fresh.
After a few other failed relationships, Lewis had fallen in love with 21-year-old Shanice Bailey.
He saw a lot of potential in their relationship and thought that this could be a part of the puzzle to, starting a new life.
But had Lewis's old life finally caught up with him?
Oh my God, Lewis!
On February 10th, Shanice found Lewis dead inside his home.
Oh my God!
Lewis was lying on the floor in a pool of blood.
Yes, 911!
As police begin processing the scene, it's clear Lewis's death was no accident.
The window was shattered, the wall was covered in bullet holes, and Lewis had been shot in the neck.
Investigators determined that Lewis must have died almost instantly.
The shot to his neck had penetrated his carotid artery, and he bled out.
Based on the level of rigor mortis, police surmised Lewis had been dead for around 24 hours. But why had he been killed? Looking around the home, detectives rule out robbery as a motive.
Investigators didn't find anything to be out of place.
Cash, electronics, and other items of value were undisturbed.
In fact, it didn't appear that Lewis's killer had even entered the home.
There were no signs of forced entry or of a struggle taking place inside.
All the shots appeared to be fired outside the home.
Found these shell casings in the parking lot.
An officer removed multiple .380 and .40 caliber shell casings from outside the home.
The shell casings reveal an alarming fact about the crime.
Finding these shell casings on the ground would, suggest that there were actually two shooters, and they just opened fire on Lewis without even stepping foot in the home.
You think it's gang-related?
Investigators wonder if Lewis's prior gang involvement may have come back to haunt him.
They knew from a preliminary search of his records that he was involving some gang activity before moving to 29 Palms.
To police, this looked like classic gang-related violence.
29 Palms has its own shady side.
Because it's in a desert area that's very sparsely populated, there's a lot of drug activity. There are drug labs and things like that.
Some of the drugs would wind up an hour away in Los Angeles, but a lot of them would circulate throughout the town.
Which meant 29 Palms wasn't entirely free of the same type of gangs Lewis left Los Angeles to escape.
Some of the businesses that cater to them, unfortunately, tend to produce a certain amount of property crime and other activities. If he was involved in criminal activity, there might be enemies as a result of criminal activity.
Back at the station, detectives begin looking over 911 call logs to try to determine what time the shooting took place.
From the looks of the crime scene, 7 shots had been fired on Lewis's home, so there was a good chance someone called in to report the noise.
Detectives are in luck.
San Bernardino 911 received several calls from Lewis' neighborhood early that morning.
Several people had called law enforcement and reported that they'd heard multiple gunshots around 1 or 2 a.m. Deputies were dispatched, but they didn't find anything.
Investigators know those must have been the gunshots that killed Lewis Kimball, but who fired them was still a mystery.
While several neighbors had heard the shots and called 911, none of them had actually seen the shooters.
As investigators continue their search for answers, news of Lewis's death spreads.
One of my friends called me and she's like, "Hey, did you know Lewis passed away?"
What?
And I was like, "What? What happened?"
You can't be serious.
And that's when I found out that he was murdered.
Not Lewis.
And when I found out that he was murdered, I was devastated. Nothing inside of me could fathom why someone would kill him, especially when he had gotten away from the gang activity. It just didn't make sense to me.
Anyone who knew Lewis knew he had been out of that life for a while. It was part of the reason why he left Los Angeles in the first place.
But could someone from Los Angeles have followed Lewis to 29 Palms? Hoping for more information that could help lead to a motive, detectives decide to sit down with the woman who discovered Lewis's body, his girlfriend, Shanice Bailey.
Shanice was completely distraught when officers first arrived at the home and was taken away while they processed the scene.
Now that she's had some time to gather her thoughts, detectives circled back to her to get her official statement.
So, how long did you know Lewis?
About a year.
Did he ever tell you about his time in L.A.?
I know what you're thinking.
She told investigators there was no way that Lewis's death was gang-related.
But Lewis isn't into that lifestyle anymore.
She was adamant that he had been going from that life for years at that point.
That's what he told you.
It's true.
She knew that he was trying to make a better life for himself.
But when detectives asked Shanice if Lewis had made any enemies in 29 Palms, she has a ready answer.
According to Shanice, there was only one person who would have wanted to harm Lewis, his ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan.
In 2006, Los Angeles police estimated the city's street gangs had approximately 40,000 members, and that gangs were responsible for almost 60% of Los Angeles homicides. In 95% of gang-related homicides, the victim was male, and while the median age of victims was 24, 30% of young men killed by gangs were still in their teens. February 10, 2006. In 29 Palms, California, detectives investigating Lewis Kimball's murder suspect his death is gang-related.
I know what you're thinking.
However, Lewis's girlfriend, Shanice Bailey, swears that isn't the case.
She didn't believe at all that this was gang-related.
It's true.
She knew that Lewis had left that life behind and he was on the straight and narrow.
Instead, she suspected that an ex-girlfriend of Lewis's had something to do with the murder.
That ex-girlfriend is 21-year-old Nicole Sullivan.
Shanice said she didn't know all that much about Nicole.
But you've met her.
Just once.
When was that?
Wednesday night.
That would have been a few hours before detectives believed the murder occurred.
Shanice says that the night started out like any other.
They decided to go to the club that night in 29 Palms.
They were having a few drinks, just hanging out.
And they wanted to have a good time.
Instead, they ran into Nicole.
Shanice told detectives that Nicole actually approached them at the club.
Hey, Lewis. Who is she?
That's my girl, bro. What you talking about?
Who the hell are you?
That led to a confrontation between the two women.
Look, you need to stay away from my man.
Oh, it's a little too late for that.
Shanice and the ex-girlfriend had words. They start to push each other.
Get out of my face.
Whoa.
And it gets to the point where, a fight breaks out.
Chill. Let's chill.
Don't play with me.
Lewis has to actually step in.
In an effort to break up the altercation, Lewis pushed Nicole off of Shanice and onto the ground.
She pushes him back and he pushes her harder. When he pushed her, she fell.
Oh, you done it now, Lewis.
She got a cut to her head. And when that happened, she was really upset.
The argument had really escalated. At that point, club security had to intervene.
I gotta go. Get your friend.
They were all thrown out the club.
But Shanice says that as they were being escorted out, it was clear that Nicole wasn't about to let things go.
You're gonna pay for this, Lewis.
Get up out of
You're
here.
gonna pay for this, Lewis.
She's yelling that, I'm going to have somebody get you.
Bye, Nicole.
A few hours later, Lewis was dead.
So you think this Nicole killed him?
Yeah.
But you weren't there.
No.
She doesn't go home with him, and he ends up going home alone.
Shanice says she tried calling Lewis in the morning, but he never answered.
It wasn't a big deal at first, but when I couldn't get him on the phone this morning, I started thinking about what Nicole said.
She was worried about what may have happened, so she came over to the house.
She finds him dead on the floor in a pool of his blood.
Oh my God, go in!
After wrapping up their conversation with Shanice, detectives make speaking to Nicole Sullivan their top priority.
She's a possible person of interest that detectives need to look into.
Based on Shanice's story, it sounded as though Nicole had actually threatened Lewis just hours before he'd been shot.
Was she upset enough to kill Lewis in cold-blooded murder?
When detectives sit down with Nicole, she seems distraught over the news of Lewis's death.
I can't believe it. I just saw him.
When was that?
Wednesday night at the club. He was with this girl.
Nicole admitted that she had been in a fight with Shanice at the club, but she also said she didn't start the fight.
That girl, Shanice, she attacked me.
Why would she do that?
Nicole told police that she and Lewis were actually in the process of getting back together.
But he was with Shanice then.
Yeah, so
But didn't that make you mad?
a little.
She said she was only upset because he was in public with another woman.
She denied having anything to do with Lewis's murder.
Detectives are now wondering if Shanice had a motive for murder that night.
She didn't know me and Lewis planned on getting back together.
Until the run-in at the club.
Look, you need to stay away from my man.
Oh, it's a little too late for that.
What's she talking about? What's she talking about, Lewis?
At this point in the investigation, detectives don't know who to believe.
Lewis Kimball was quite the ladies' man. He had two women fighting over him.
But did one of the women go so far as to kill him?
Did you go to Lewis's apartment that night?
No.
Unsure who to believe, detectives pay a visit to the club where Nicole and Shanice had their showdown.
Investigators want to get a more objective viewpoint of what happened the night Lewis died.
The staff at the club corroborated that Shanice and Nicole were fighting over Lewis.
Yeah, they seem to be fighting over a guy, causing a ruckus, so I escorted him out.
The bouncer said after he'd kicked them out, Nicole left with the people that she'd been hanging out with that night.
However, the bouncer also adds a surprising new detail.
As the group was being kicked out of the club, Shanice and Lewis got into a fight.
I'm not your baby.
Shanice!
To detectives, this explains why Lewis went home alone that night. But does it also point to his killer?
Investigators became immediately suspicious because Shanice had left that out of her story.
In February 2006, detectives in 29 Palms, California, now suspect it was a tangled love affair, not gang violence, that led to Lewis Kimball's murder.
The night he died, there had been a fight at the club involving his current girlfriend, Shanice Bailey, and his ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan.
What's she talking about, Lewis?
I don't know what she's talking about.
Oh!
That girl Shanice, she attacked me.
Why would she do that?
I know what you're thinking.
Both women are trying to shift the blame.
All right, ma'am. Thank you very much. That's all we need, okay?
Police investigating the murder caught themselves in the middle of a love triangle with everyone pointing the finger.
According to bouncers at the club, Shanice had even gotten into an argument with Lewis after they broke up the fight with Nicole.
Shanice had left that out of her story.
I'm not your baby.
Shanice and Nicole each seemed to have a motive to harm Lewis.
Maybe the women had teamed up. If Lewis was two-timing both of them, there were two different types of shell casings found at the scene.
It's 380 and 40 caliber.
Which indicated there were two different shooters.
However, detectives still don't have solid proof that either one of the shooters is Shanice or Nicole.
There was no forensic evidence at the scene that would link to either woman, or anyone else for that matter.
There were no prints on the shell casings found at the scene.
No one had actually seen the shooters.
Looking for new leads, detectives make an appeal in the local news media, asking the public for information.
As a result, they hear from a local man who's actually a taxi driver in the area.
He happened to be near Lewis's apartment building the night of the shooting.
The cab driver says he didn't witness the murder, but he believes he did see the shooters.
He had been driving along his way to pick up a customer when he heard several loud bangs.
He claimed he saw two men running from the apartment complex after hearing shots fired.
This new revelation throws investigators for a loop.
If there were two men involved, then that would immediately eliminate Shanice and Nicole as the shooters.
But it does confirm for detectives that there were, in fact, two shooters.
Who those shooters are remains a mystery.
Unfortunately, the taxi driver can't give detectives any identifying details about who the shooters are.
The cab driver's story didn't entirely exonerate Nicole and Shanice either.
Even if the women didn't pull the trigger, it doesn't mean that one of them wasn't the mastermind behind the whole thing.
What? What you want to do?
Detectives decide to switch gears and contact the friends who had been at the club with Nicole on the night of the altercation. Perhaps they knew more about what happened afterwards.
Those were people that the detectives would definitely want to speak to.
Step C right here, please.
Detectives learned that Nicole had been out with Sister Sierra and Shayla Walker, so they bring them in for an interview.
Sierra and Shayla were adamant that they did nothing wrong.
We barely even know Lewis, okay?
But they also revealed that Nicole had lied to detectives.
Did you go home after you got kicked out of the club?
Well, no.
They had not gone straight home after they left the club, like she said.
After being thrown out of the club, they ran into a couple of friends in the parking lot.
Hey, y'all, what's going on?
Those friends are 24-year-old Antoine Williams and 19-year-old Bryson Hall.
This place sucks tonight. Y'all want to go somewhere else?
Yeah, we can go back to my place.
That's cool. Y'all want to do that?
According to Sierra and Shayla, Bryson drove the group over to his house to hang out after they had run into each other.
At Bryson's, Shayla and Sierra saw Nicole discussing something with the two men.
They didn't know what was being discussed until Nicole said it was time to go over to Lewis's place.
Hey, y'all, we're going to go over to Lewis's place. I kind of want to have a word with him after what happened earlier.
Sierra and Shayla felt a little uneasy about going over there after the altercation in the club, but they wanted to support their friend.
So you all went over there?
Yes.
The Walker sisters have just put Nicole at the scene of the crime.
The girls insist that Nicole only wanted to talk to Lewis.
They said, honestly, she loved Lewis, and she just didn't want him to be mad at her.
Once the group arrived at the complex, Sierra and Shayla say they waited in the car, while Nicole and the guys approached Lewis's apartment.
We'll be right back.
They did think it was odd that Antoine and Bryson were going in with Nicole, but they sort of brushed the red flag aside.
According to the sisters, chaos soon erupted.
The sisters said they heard several gunshots and saw Nicole running back towards the car.
Girl, what was that? Nothing. We got to get out.
Seconds later, Antoine and Bryson followed suit, and the group sped off into the night.
Sierra and Shayla said they were dropped off at home after that, and they didn't ask any more questions.
They were afraid about what could happen to them if they asked anything else about what had taken place.
Still, the sisters' story fits with what detectives already know.
There were 2 different caliber of shell casings at the scene.
The taxi driver saw 2 males fleeing the scene.
But if the Walker sisters' account is true, Nicole could have been one of the shooters.
The sisters remember Bryson, Antoine, and Nicole approaching the home before shots were fired.
That means any combination of the 3 could have been responsible for firing the shots that killed Lewis.
You're free to go.
Detectives knew they needed to get these 3 into custody ASAP to get to the bottom of what happened that night.
In 29 Palms, California, detectives investigating the homicide case of 28-year-old Lewis Kimball have just learned that one of their suspects, Lewis's ex-girlfriend, Nicole Sullivan, wasn't entirely truthful during their initial interview with her.
Nicole's friends Sierra and Shayla Walker said they had gone with her to Lewis's place the night of the shooting with Antoine Williams and Bryson Hall.
We'll be right back.
Sierra and Shayla recall shots being fired, but they didn't actually see who fired the shots.
Police immediately put out an APB for Antoine Williams and Bryson Hall. In the meantime, they bring Nicole back in for another round of questioning.
What is this about? I already told y'all everything I know.
She continues to deny having any involvement in Lewis's death.
I didn't have anything to do with what happened to Lewis.
But when detectives confront Nicole with what the Walker sisters told them, she begins to break down.
When she realized that she had been caught in a lie, her demeanor completely changed.
I didn't mean for this to happen.
Nicole admits that the group went over to Lewis's place that night and echoes the Walker sisters' claim that she'd only intended to talk to her ex.
We'll be right back.
But according to Nicole, Antoine and Bryson had other plans.
She said the men rushed ahead of her towards the apartment, and everything happened fast after that.
As she followed them, the men just opened fire on the home.
Nicole said that as soon as the men started firing, she took off back toward the car.
It was all Antoine and Bryson. I had nothing to do with it.
She said after hearing about what happened at the club, The guys must have taken it upon themselves to punish Lewis.
She maintains that, her intentions were only to talk things out with Lewis. She had no ill will as far as violence towards him.
But under California law, all three individuals could be held responsible for this tragedy.
When detectives finished interviewing Nicole, they put her under arrest for the murder of Lewis Kimball.
Stand up, please, ma'am.
I had nothing to do with his murder. It was Antoine and Bryson. It wasn't
Put your hands
me.
behind your back, please.
The theory was that she was an aider and abetter of that crime.
I only wanted to talk to him.
Detectives aren't convinced that her intentions are as pure as she's leading on.
This way, please.
In the eyes of law enforcement, there was no reason for Antoine and Bryson to kill Lewis unless Nicole put them up to it.
The next morning, police are able to bring Bryson Hall into custody. But he isn't much help in unraveling the mystery of who really orchestrated this crime.
He didn't want to talk to detectives about what happened that night and lawyered up.
He also didn't give information on the whereabouts of Williams.
And tracking down Antoine will be easier said than done.
Days go by, and police are starting to think, maybe somebody tipped them off.
They're not sure that they're going to be able to bring him to justice because he's on the run.
But on February 18th, detectives receive a promising tip.
Homicide.
A woman called in and said she was currently in Vegas with Antoine.
She had seen on the news that he was a wanted man and knew she had to say something.
She agrees to tell police, where they can find him.
Once the tipster gives them Antoine's location, detectives arrange for Las Vegas police and federal marshals to take him into custody.
9 days after the murder of Lewis Kimball, police arrest him.
But just like his pal Bryson Hall, Antoine isn't willing to say much.
He also lawyered up right away.
On May 15th, 2007, the murder trial against Nicole Sullivan, Bryson Hall, and Antoine Williams begins inside a San Bernardino courtroom.
All three defendants were tried together.
But the outcome will shock even the most seasoned attorneys.
She recants a whole story.
You could have knocked me over with a feather duster when I heard that.
What I'd like everybody to know about Lewis was that he had a really, really big heart. And I think maybe there just wasn't enough people to bring that out of him, which is why a lot of people didn't see that side. So I just want everybody to know, just don't count someone out because they've had a horrible past or a criminal past. Because at the end of the day, there's still someone inside. And that someone is often a really, really good person.
On May 15th, 2007, the joint trial against Nicole Sullivan, Bryson Hall, and Antoine Williams for the murder of 28-year-old Lewis Kimball has gotten underway. Unfortunately, none of Lewis's loved ones are able to be there.
No one showed up on Lewis's behalf, like no family or, anything like that. I attempted to attend the trial, but I wasn't able to go because I had to work. 29 Palms is 2 hours away from Los Angeles. It's a long way to drive for a lot of people.
In their opening statement, prosecutors assert Nicole Sullivan's jealousy and rage against Lewis Kimball fueled Bryson and Antoine's actions.
The prosecution theorized that Bryson and Antoine were the ones who fired the shots, but that they did it at Nicole's behest.
There was much testimony about the dispute that boiled over at the nightclub immediately before the shooting took place.
Hey, Lewis. Who is she?
The prosecution argued that when Nicole saw Lewis in the club with Shanice,
Get out of my face.
she just became enraged.
She was mortified and embarrassed.
Oh, you've done it now, Lewis.
She felt like, she had been assaulted.
You're going to pay for this, Lewis. You're going to pay
According to the prosecution, as soon as Nicole ran into Bryson and Antoine outside the club, she began plotting her revenge.
Prosecution maintains that they knew exactly what they were going to do when they headed to Lewis's apartment. Why else would they go to the house at 2 o'clock in the morning, armed?
Prosecutors weren't sure which man fired the .40 caliber and which fired the .380.
One of the bullet strikes that struck Mr. Kimball severed one of his carotid arteries, which would have had him bleed to death within minutes.
And by the time of the trial, 2 other witnesses have come forward who claim that Bryson Hall has talked about the crime.
His girlfriend and his aunt told the courtroom that Bryson had been bragging about shooting up Lewis's place.
But will jurors hear from the other person who identified Bryson and Antoine as the shooters? Nicole Sullivan.
She was interviewed by the police prior to my representation of her, and she gave a rather detailed statement to them, which basically placed the blame for the crime on the 2 male individuals.
It was all Antoine and Bryson. I had nothing to do with it.
However, the fact that Nicole was being tried with Bryson and Antoine complicated things.
The tape was inadmissible in court because at the time, she was the co-defendant.
As long as she was a co-defendant, it's simply inadmissible hearsay.
Which puts the prosecutor in a bit of a bind.
He needed the statement from her to identify the 2 shooters. He couldn't get it while she was a co-defendant with them. And that's when he came to me.
The prosecution needs Nicole to agree to take the stand and testify against the 2 men. So in the middle of the murder trial, they decide to offer her a deal.
She'd be allowed to plead guilty to felony assault with a firearm.
In exchange for her testimony, she only had to serve 3 years probation.
She would be released that day, provided she testified.
With the risk of life in prison hanging over her head, Nicole takes the deal.
Okay, I'll do it.
There was really no practical choice in the matter. My client was charged with murder, and that was just too big a gamble to take.
But are the prosecutors taking an even bigger gamble on Nicole? When their new star witness takes the stand, nothing goes as they intended.
When she takes a stand, she shocks everyone.
She recants a whole story identifying Bryson and Antoine as the shooters.
She claimed she had no memory of making any such statement.
The prosecutor is just disgusted by her actions. He described her demeanor on the stand as just despicable.
However, Nicole's sudden reversal doesn't completely derail the case.
At that point, under the rules of evidence, the prior statement that she made became admissible in evidence. So that gave the prosecution the opportunity to play that recorded statement in the case against the 2 remaining defendants, and that's what they did.
They basically impeached her with her prior inconsistent statement.
But will that be enough to secure Bryson and Antoine's convictions?
Attorneys for Bryson and Antoine argued there was no proof they were the shooters. They claimed it could have just as easily been Nicole Sullivan.
On June 11, 2007, after 3 long days of deliberation, the jury returns with a verdict.
The jury found both Bryson Hall and Antoine Williams not guilty of first-degree murder.
You could have knocked me over with a feather duster when I heard that. I was astonished that they were acquitted.
According to the jury, due to the lack of evidence and the conflicting witness account, there just wasn't enough for them to convict.
The only person who ends up behind bars is Nicole Sullivan.
Recanting her story on the stand broke the terms of her plea deal.
Since she violated the plea agreement, the prosecutors rescinded the offer of parole.
Although Nicole isn't found guilty of murder, she is found guilty of felony assault with a firearm.
Accounting for time served, she spends less than 2 years in prison.
For Lewis Kimball's loved ones, the outcome of the court proceedings just makes his death an even harder pill to swallow.
The fact that no one was convicted of murder itself made it feel like Lewis would never get justice for what happened to him.
for anyone to go shooting into someone else's house. Anyone who does that should absolutely be behind bars because you have given us reason to believe that you don't value human life. He didn't deserve to die that way.
Lewis Kimball was a young man who tried admirably to turn his life around, only to have it stolen from him.
It's just really sad that, Lewis was on the right track. And after struggle, just was never able to get to the top of that mountain. And for it to end like this, it's just heartbreaking.
Once the verdict came down, what came to mind was something that he said as a young kid, which was, I'm going to die by the time I'm 21. In a later conversation, and he was older than 21, he said he didn't think he was going to live to see 30. And he died just before he turned 29. So that resonated with my heart.
It resonated so much that Candace did something to ensure that while he may be gone, Lewis Kimball will never be forgotten.
I said, you know what? I'm going to take his last name. And in August of 2007, I changed my name to Candace Kimball so that he knows that somebody did care, because I would carry it for the rest of my life.
Presse had been concluded. Perlonstedt's remains had been identified through DNA testing and returned to his descendants in a small town near Trondheim. The Norwegian government had sent a representative to the reburial quiet ceremony held on the very ridge where he had been lost. Jimmy attended, standing at the back of the crowd, watching as Hattie James laid a single sprig of heather on the coffin. Jimmy sat in his kitchen, the windows open to the sound of the gulls. A letter from Sandy lay on the table. The young man had moved to Edinburgh to join the police force there, seeking a place where the shadows weren't quite so long. I'm learning to be a detective, he'd written, but I'll never forget what you taught me about the truth, even when it hurts the people you love. Cassie was in the garden, planting seeds. She looked up and waved, the spring sun catching her hair. She was planning to head to Glasgow for university in the autumn, and the thought of the quiet house filled Jimmy with a preemptive loneliness. He stood and walked to the door. The sun was setting, casting a long, golden light over the hills, the simmer dim of the northern latitudes where the sun never truly disappears. There would be more cases, more secrets, and more storms. But for today, the bone fields were silent. The island was at peace, and in the long light of the Shetland spring, that was enough. He walked down toward the water, the salt air filling his lungs. He thought of Mima, sitting on her ridge, watching the world change. He realized that justice wasn't just about handcuffs and courtrooms. It was about giving the dead back their names. "Dad," Cassie called out from the fence. "Are we doing dinner or what? The pasta won't cook itself." Jimmy smiled, a real one this time. "I'm coming, Cass, and I promise this time I'll watch the clock." As he turned back toward the house, he noticed a small, weathered stone by the path. It was an ancient marker, worn smooth by centuries of wind. It reminded him that while people passed and empires crumbled, the islands remained. They were older than greed, older than betrayal. They were the salt and the stone, and they would endure long after the stories of the Haldanes and the Wilsons had faded into legend. Chapter 13, The Rustle of Dying Leaves. Late August in Shetland is a season of transition. The vibrant green of the spring hills fades into a deep, bruised purple as the heather blooms, only to be whipped away by the first of the equinoctial gales. For Jimmy Perez, the air felt thinner, the silence in his house louder. Cassie's room was a battlefield of cardboard boxes and half-folded clothes. The scent of her perfume, something floral and bright, competed with the smell of the damp earth she'd tracked in from her final walks along the cliffs. "You're sure you have enough warm coats?" Jimmy asked, leaning against her doorframe. He felt like a cliched father, grasping at logistics because the emotions were too large to handle. "Dad, it's Glasgow, not the Arctic Circle," Cassie said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was nervous, he could tell. The islands were a cocoon, and she was about to emerge into a world that didn't care about family names or the direction of the wind. "I know. Just don't forget where you come from," he said softly. "I won't. I'll probably be the only one in my dorm who knows how to gut a fish," she joked, taping up a box labeled books. The phone in the hallway rang a sharp, demanding sound that broke the moment. Jimmy sighed. In this line of work, a phone call at dinner time was rarely an invitation to a party. Perez, he answered, "Jimmy, it's Billy at the desk. We've got a situation at the Northlink Ferry Terminal. A passenger from the Aberdeen crossing. They found him in his cabin after everyone else had disembarked. Drunk?" Jimmy asked, hoping it was just another Yunsen-style incident. "Dead?" Billy said, his voice dropping an octave. And Jimmy, he was carrying a folder. It's got Holden Legal Defense written all over it. We think he was a private investigator. Jimmy felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The ghost of the Holden case wasn't done with them yet. Chapter 14, The Passenger in 4B. The ferry terminal was a hive of activity, though the atmosphere was hushed. The Rossi sat at the quay, its massive hull looming over the pier like a sleeping beast. Jimmy and Tosh met at the gangway, both of them windswept and weary. "Who is he?" Jimmy asked as they walked toward the cabin decks. "Name's Marcus Thorne," Tosh said, consulting her tablet. "Former Met Officer turned Pi. Based in London. He booked a one-way ticket from Aberdeen. Cabin for B. The cabin was small and sterile. Thorne lay across the narrow bunk, his eyes half open, staring at the ceiling. There was no obvious sign of violence, no blood, no struggle. Just a man who had gone to sleep and never woken up. Look at this." Tosh pointed to a small silver flask on the bedside table. It smelled faintly of almonds. "And this," she held up a thick manila folder. It was stuffed with photocopies of the Holden ledger, the very same ledger that had sent Jackie to prison. But there were annotations in the margins, written in a sharp, hurried hand. Names Jimmy didn't recognize. Amounts of money that dwarf even the Holden fortune. He wasn't investigating the past, Jimmy whispered, flipping through the pages. He was looking for the people who were still benefiting from that gold today, the silent partners. And he found them, Tosh added, looking at the dead man. Or they found him. Jimmy walked to the porthole. Outside, the lights of Lerwick twinkled, unaware that a new shadow had fallen over the harbor. He thought of Cassie, safe at home for one more night, and the weight of the islands felt heavier than ever. Chapter 15, The Shadow of the Silent Partners. By dawn, the post-mortem results had confirmed their fears. Cyanide, a classic, cold, and professional execution. He was poisoned during dinner, Tosh reported as they sat in the station's small break room. The steward remembers him having the seafood platter. We're checking the kitchen staff, but it's a needle in a haystack. It wasn't the kitchen staff, Jimmy said, staring at a map of the North Sea. Thorne was followed from London. Someone knew he'd cracked the ledger. The annotations in the folder pointed toward a series of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. But the local connection was what bothered Jimmy. Thorne had circled a specific name several times, the Solstice Group. Duncan Hunter, Tosh noted, her eyes widening. He's the CEO of Solstice, the man who wanted to buy Mima's land for the holiday lets. Duncan's an opportunist, but I never pegged him for a conspirator in a 70-year-old Nazi gold scheme, Jimmy mused. Maybe he didn't know the origin, Tosh suggested. Maybe he just saw a convenient source of funding for his Viking lodges. Jimmy stood up, grabbing his coat. I'm going to have a talk with Duncan and Tosh. I want to guard on Hattie James. If Thorne was digging, he might have spoken to her. She's the only one left who knows that Ridge as well as the Haldanes did. As he drove out toward Duncan's office, the wind began to howl. A low, mournful sound that seemed to whisper of things long buried. Jimmy realized that the bone fields weren't just a location on a map. They were a legacy of greed that stretched across generations. And he was standing right in the middle of it. Chapter 16, The Glass Office. Duncan Hunter's office was located in a sleek, modern building near the new marina structure of glass and polished stone that felt entirely out of place in the rugged landscape of Shetland. It was the headquarters of the Solstice Group, a company that seemed to own half the construction and hospitality contracts on the islands. When Jimmy walked in, Duncan was on the phone, leaning back in a leather chair with his feet on a mahogany desk. He looked every bit the prosperous entrepreneur, but there was a flicker of something calculation perhaps in his eyes, when he saw Jimmy. Inspector Perez, Duncan said, hanging up the phone. To what do I owe the pleasure? More questions about the Haldanes. I thought that book was closed. Books like that rarely stay closed. Duncan, Jimmy said, taking a seat. He laid the manila folder Thorne had been carrying on the desk. Ever heard of Marcus Thorne? Duncan glanced at the folder, then back at Jimmy. His face remained a mask of polite indifference. Doesn't ring a bell. Why? He was found dead on the Aberdeen ferry last night. Cyanide. He was carrying this. Jimmy flipped open the folder to a page where Solstice Group had been circled in red ink. He seemed to think your company was receiving monthly consultancy fees from a shell company in Zurich, a company tied directly to the old Holdan estate. Duncan didn't blink. Solstice deals with dozens of international investors. I don't keep track of every parent company's lineage. If Thorne was digging into my finances, he was wasting his time. Everything we do is above board. Then you won't mind if we have a look at your records, Jimmy said. I'd mind very much. Duncan shot back, his tone losing its polish. Unless you have a warrant. This is a business, Jimmy, not a parish council meeting. I have shareholders to protect. Jimmy stood up. He could feel the tension in the room, a vibrating energy that suggested he had struck a nerve. Thorne wasn't just a nosy pie. He was a former Met officer. He knew a money trail when he saw one. And someone thought he was dangerous enough to kill on a public ferry. As he walked out, Duncan called after him. Shetland is changing. Jimmy, people want progress. They want jobs. Don't go digging up the past just because you can't handle the future. Chapter 17, The Echo in the Earth. The rigid Bresse felt different today. The orange mesh was gone, and the trenches had been filled in. But the earth still felt unsettled. Hattie James stood by the old standing stone, her collar turned up against the wind. Two uniformed officers stood a short distance away, their presence a jarring reminder of the danger. They won't let me go near the site, Hattie said when Jimmy arrived. Even though the uni says the work is done, it's for your safety, Hattie, Jimmy said. Thorne is dead, and we found your name in his notes. He was going to call you the day he arrived. Why me? Because of the box, Jimmy said. He believed there was a second cache. He found a reference to the twin of the ridge in the old papers. He thought there was another box buried somewhere else on Mima's land. Patty looked at the ground, her eyes narrowing. The twin. Wait. The old islanders used to call the standing stone the twin, because there used to be two of them centuries ago. The other one fell in a storm in the 1800s. Where was the other one located? Patty pointed to a patch of ground about 50 yards away, near a clump of gorse bushes that seemed perpetually windswept. Right there? Mima used to say nothing would ever grow there. She said the ground was sour. Jimmy walked over to the spot. The earth was uneven, covered in thick moss and stubborn weeds. He knelt and brushed away some of the debris. As he did, he noticed a faint, metallic glint peeking through the soil. Hattie, get back, he ordered. He didn't have his digging tools, but the earth was soft from the recent rains. He used a flat stone to clear the dirt. Slowly, the shape emerged, not another rusted box, but a heavy, lead-lined cylinder. It looked like a military-grade transport container from the 1940s. What is it? Hattie whispered, ignoring his order to stay back. The rest of the story, Jimmy said, as he lifted the cylinder. A sharp, mechanical click echoed through the air. A small, red light began to blink on the top of the container. Inspector, one of the officers shouted, pointing his radio toward the sky. We've got a drone directly overhead. Jimmy looked up. A sleek, black drone was hovering just above them, its camera lens tracking their every move. Suddenly, the blinking light on the cylinder turned from red to a steady, menacing green. Everyone, run, Jimmy yelled, grabbing Hattie's arm. They scrambled away from the gorse bushes just as a muffled explosion shook the ground. The cylinder didn't blow up into a ball of fire. Instead, it released a thick, white cloud of gas that clung to the ground like a toxic fog. Chapter 18, The Crossing. The evacuation of the ridge was a blur of sirens and hazmat suits. Hattie was taken to the hospital as a precaution, though she seemed more angry than injured. Jimmy stood at the harbor, watching the smoke rise from Bressay. The gas was a specialized chemical marker, harmless, but designed to contaminate any evidence inside the cylinder if it was opened improperly. They destroyed it, Tosh said, riding on the scene. Someone had a remote kill switch on that container. The moment it was moved, the files inside were incinerated. It wasn't just files, Jimmy said, his voice cold. It was a warning. They can reach us anywhere, even on a lonely ridge in the middle of a gale. But he didn't have time to process the defeat. The clock was ticking. At the Northlink terminal, the Hjaltland was preparing for the overnight crossing to Aberdeen. Cassie stood by the luggage rack, her two suitcases looking incredibly small against the backdrop of the massive ship. "You don't have to go tonight," Jimmy said, his hand resting on the railing. "With everything that's happening, I can drive you down tomorrow. We can take the ferry together." "Dad," Cassie said, her voice firm, "if I don't go now, I might never go. This is my life. I can't let your cases dictate my future." Jimmy looked at his daughter. She was 19, brave, and entirely too much like him. He realized that she was right. He couldn't keep her in the cocoon forever. "I know," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Just stay safe. Call me the moment you get to the halls. And don't talk to strangers on the ferry. I'm a Shetlander. Dad, I know how to handle a boat." She joked, though her eyes were wet, as the horn sounded, signaling the final call for passengers. Jimmy watched her walk up the gangway. She didn't look back until she reached the top, where she gave a small, brave wave. He stood on the pier until the ship began to pull away, its lights reflecting in the dark water. He felt a profound sense of loss, a hollow space in his chest that the wind couldn't fill. But as the Hjaltland cleared the harbor wall and turned south, a new feeling took over, a cold, sharp clarity. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had been hesitant to use. "Sandy, it's Jimmy. I know you're in Edinburgh. but I need you to go back to the archives. The ones we didn't check. The records of the Solstice Group's founders. I think the gold didn't just build. Trawlers. I think it built the very ground we're standing on. Chapter 19, The Predator's Shadow. The night was black and featureless as Jimmy drove back toward Lerwick. He felt the weight of the islands pressing in on him, the secrets of 70 years acting like an anchor. He didn't notice the car behind him at first. It had its lights off, a dark shape trailing him through the winding turns of the coastal road. It wasn't until he reached the long straight near Gubberwick that the pursuer made its move. The car, a heavy-duty SUV, roared to life, its high beams blinding Jimmy in his rearview mirror. It slammed into his bumper, sending a jolt through the small police car. "Shit!" Jimmy hissed, gripping the wheel. The SUV slammed into him again, harder this time, trying to push him toward the edge of the cliff. Jimmy could hear the roar of the Atlantic below, the white foam of the waves crashing against the rocks. He steered into the impact, fighting to keep the car on the road. Suddenly, the SUV pulled alongside him. The passenger window rolled down, and for a split second, Jimmy saw a face not Duncan Hunter's, but someone he recognized from the Shetland bus photos. A younger version of the man who had been a silent partner. The man didn't have a gun. He had a small, handheld device that pulsed with a blue light. He pointed it at Jimmy's car. Instantly, the electronics in Jimmy's vehicle went dead. The engine sputtered and died. The power steering failed, and the headlights flickered out. He was hurtling toward a sharp bend at 60 miles an hour in total darkness. "Cassie," he whispered, his hands white on the wheel. He slammed on the mechanical handbrake, the tires screaming as the car spun out of control. It veered off the road, crashing through a wooden fence and tumbling down the steep embankment. The last thing Jimmy heard before the world went black was the distant, rhythmic moaning of the wind. Chapter 20, The Awakening. Pain was the first thing to return. It was a dull, throbbing ache in his temples and a sharp, stabbing sensation in his shoulder. Jimmy opened his eyes and saw nothing but a canopy of stars. He was lying in the grass, several yards away from the wreckage of his car. The smell of gasoline and salt spray was overwhelming. He tried to move, but his body felt like it was made of lead. Inspector, a voice whispered. He turned his head slowly. Standing over him was a figure in a heavy wool sweater. It wasn't the man from the SUV. It was a woman. Naima, he gasped. No, Jimmy, the woman said, kneeling beside him. It's Vicky from the museum. Vicky, what are you doing here? I followed them, she said, her voice trembling. I saw them leaving the Solstice building. I knew something was wrong. Jimmy, the ledger Thorne was carrying. It was missing a page. The page that explained why Per Lundstedt was really killed. Why? Jimmy wheezed. Vicky leaned in closer, her face lit by the pale moonlight. He wasn't just an agent. He was the son of the man who owned the Zurich Shell Company. He was sent here to investigate his own father's betrayal. The gold didn't come from the Nazis. Jimmy, it came from the Norwegian resistance. It was stolen. Jimmy felt the pieces clicking together, a cold realization that made the pain in his body seem insignificant. The Haldanes and the Wilsons hadn't just been traitors, they had been thieves of the worst kind. They had stolen the future of a nation. Where is the page? Vicky, I have it, she said, reaching into her pocket. But Jimmy, the SUV, they're coming back. They didn't see me, but they're circling the road. Jimmy struggled to sit up. He could see the headlights of the SUV scanning the embankment above them. He looked at the wreckage of his car, then at the dark, vast expanse of the bone field stretching out toward the sea. Go, Vicky, he ordered. Get to the station. Tell Tosh. Tell her the Solstice Group is just the tip of the iceberg. What about you? Jimmy looked at the high beams of the SUV as they crested the hill. He felt a sudden, fierce determination of Viking spirit that had been dormant for too long. I'm a Shetlander, he said, his voice regaining its strength. I'm staying with the bones. As Vicky disappeared into the shadows, Jimmy crawled toward the shelter of a large rock. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his backup radio the one the poles hadn't reached. He didn't call for backup. He didn't call for an ambulance. He called Cassie. Dad! Her voice came through, sounding small and far away on the ferry. Cassie, he whispered, I love you. And remember, the wind always tells the truth. You just have to know how to listen. He clicked the radio off just as the heavy boots of the pursuers began to crunch in the gravel above him. The hunt was on, but in the bone fields of Shetland, the hunters were about to find out that some things are better left buried. Betrayal of the Faithful, a novel based on true events. Prologue, the weight of a promise. Trust is the currency of the soul. In the shimmering heat of the Arizona desert, it is as precious as water, a rare commodity that people guard with their lives until they find a well they believe is holy. In the biting winds of a Chicago winter, trust is the only warmth an elderly heart has left when the family has moved away and the bones grow brittle. But trust is also a weapon. For those who know how to wield it, a Bible verse can be more effective than a locksmith's pick, and a doctor's white coat can hide a darker stain than any surgical spell. When you tell a man you are doing God's work, he stops looking at your hands and starts looking at the heavens. That is the moment his pocket is easiest to pick. This is the story of two men who traded in the most sacred of commodities, faith. One built a kingdom on the shifting sands of false promises, using the tides of the faithful to fuel a machine of vanity. The other carved a fortune out of the feet of the dying, turning a profession of healing into a ritual of theft. Both learned, too late, that when the bill for greed finally comes due, it is not paid in gold, but in the blood of the innocent and the shattered lives of those who dare to believe. Part 1, The Mirage in the Desert. Chapter 1, The Architect of Dreams. The year was 1982. And Phoenix was a city gasping for breath under a sky so blue it looked painted. It was a place of rapid expansion, where the desert was being pushed back by sprawling stucco suburbs and turquoise swimming pools. At the center of this transformation stood William Kratz, At 34, Kratz was the embodiment of the New South success. He was a brilliant attorney, a man whose speech was seasoned with just enough legal jargon to sound authoritative and just enough scripture to sound anointed. When he took over the Baptist Foundation of Arizona BFA, he didn't see a nonprofit. He saw a sleeping giant. The Lord doesn't want his children to be poor. Tom, Kratz said one afternoon, his voice echoing in the mahogany-lined boardroom of the BFA headquarters. He was looking out at the Camelback Mountain, his reflection in the glass overlaying the landscape. Tom Grabinski, the foundation's in-house counsel, adjusted his tie. He was a man of shadows and fine print, the perfect technician for Kratz's grand design. The convention expects us to fund missions, Bill, not to play the market. We aren't playing, Tom. We are stewarding, Kratz corrected, turning around. His eyes burned with a quiet, holy fire that made dissent feel like blasphemy. Think of the senior housing we can build, the food banks, the hungry children. We can take the widow's mite and turn it into a mountain of gold. All we need is the capital. And who better to provide it than the people who already trust us? The plan was elegant, daring, and fundamentally broken from the start. They called it stewardship investments. They told the faithful that by loaning their savings to the BFA, they weren't just earning a 10% return, nearly double what the local banks offered. They were building the kingdom of God. Kratz convinced himself he was a visionary. If the real estate market dipped, he would simply wait for God to raise it back up. In the meantime, he created a LOA secret entity, a bad bank designed to swallow the foundation's losses and hide them from the prying eyes of the flock. He wasn't lying. He told himself he was merely managing the timing of a miracle. Chapter 2, The Sermon of the Silver Tongue. As the 80s progressed, the BFAS influence spread like wildfire through the Southern Baptist congregations of the Southwest. Kratz was no longer just an administrator, he was a celebrity. When he walked into any church, the atmosphere shifted. He was greeted like the Pope, a man who possessed the rare combination of spiritual depth and financial genius. The sales pitches were choreographed masterpieces of psychological manipulation. Salesmen, handpicked and trained by Kratz, would enter fellowship halls and nursing homes with Bibles in one hand and brochures in the other. They used the word stewardship as a shield against skepticism. Brother Bill isn't just an investor. A salesman would tell a group of retirees in a humid Baptist hall, he's a prayer warrior with a divine gift for numbers. Why leave your money with a secular bank that uses your deposits to fund things that go against your values? Invest with the foundation. Your interest helps build the kingdom. It's an investment that pays in this life and the next. The numbers were staggering. Tens of millions, then hundreds of millions flowed into the foundation's coffers. The stewardship funds were used to buy raw desert land, speculative commercial buildings, and suburban developments. On paper, the BFA was a juggernaut. In reality, it was a house of cards built on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to change. Chapter 3, The Widow's Mite. In a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Bill and Pat Anderson sat at their small kitchen table. For them, the Southern Baptist Church wasn't just a place of worship. It was their life's anchor. 3 years prior, Pat had faced a life-threatening brain aneurysm. Against all odds, she had survived. In the quiet hours of her recovery, they had pledged their lives and their resources to the Lord. Look at this brochure, Bill, Pat said, her finger tracing the image of a serene retirement community. It says here that our money stays in the community. It builds houses for the elderly. And look at the rate, 10%. Bill, a retired plant manager who knew the value of a hard-earned dollar, squinted at the paper. It's backed by the Southern Baptist Convention, Pat, and it's audited by Arthur Anderson. That's a world-class firm. If we can't trust the Baptists and Arthur Anderson, who can we trust? They weren't greedy. They just wanted to be good stewards. They took their life savings, $200,000, every penny saved from decades of factory work, and moved it into the BFA. They felt a profound sense of peace. They were doing well by doing good. Across town, Robert Shaw was making a similar choice. A car salesman who had found his way back from the brink of alcoholism through the church. Robert saw the BFA as the ultimate safety net for his daughter's future. He put in $250,000, including the $60,000 he had meticulously set aside for her college tuition. For over a decade, the checks arrived like clockwork. The mirage was indistinguishable from reality because the interest was real even if the money behind it was a theft from the next generation of believers. Chapter 4, The Whistleblower's Burden. By 1994, the internal gears of the BFA were grinding with the grit of 1,000 lies. Kyle Tresh, a young, idealistic attorney and the son of a preacher from Tulsa, joined the legal team thinking he was entering a sanctuary. But the sanctuary was a hall of mirrors. As Tresh began to review the transactions between the BFA and Allo, he felt a cold chill. The profits were ghosts. When the Arizona real estate bubble burst in the late 80s, the BFAS holdings had plummeted. Rather than admit the loss and face the convention, Kratz had sold the devalued land to Allo, a company the BFA secretly controlled at massive profits. Allo paid with IOUs that would never be honored. It was a classic Ponzi scheme, but one performed in a choir loft. Tresh walked into Grabinski's office, a stack of ledgers in his hand. "Tom, these notes from Allo. They're worthless. This company has a negative net worth of $100 million. We are telling investors we have assets we don't have." Grabinski didn't look up from his desk. Real estate is a long game. Kyle, you're looking at a snapshot. Bill has a vision for these properties. When the market turns, Allah will be the foundation's greatest asset. You just need more faith. Faith isn't a substitute for an honest balance sheet, Tresh countered. The tension in the office became unbearable. Tresh and first staff accountants realized they were being asked to paint a masterpiece on a rotting canvas. In April 1996, they resigned in a block. Tresh's resignation letter was a searing indictment of the foundation's leadership, but Kratz managed to bury it, telling the board that Tresh was spiritually immature. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Fell Out of Her Chair. The year was 1998, and the dessert heat was matched only by the intensity of the suspicion gathering round the BFA. D. Grebel, a sharp-eyed CPA with a no-nonsense attitude, was looking at a BFA prospectus brought to her by a worried client. They want me to mortgage my home to buy more BFA notes, the client had said. Gribble started digging. She saw a line item. $70 million in notes receivable from a mysterious benefactor. It sounded prestigious, but Gribble wanted facts. She spent hours at the Arizona Corporation Commission digging through public filings. When she finally linked Benefactor B to Aloe Inc., she looked at ALO's own financial reports. The company was bleeding out, a hollowed-out carcass of failed real estate deals. They're broke, Gribble whispered to the empty room. They're totally, utterly stone broke. She literally fell out of her chair in shock. This wasn't just a bad investment. It was a criminal enterprise. She ran down the hallway of her office to tell her partner, "This whole thing is a fraud. They're paying old investors with new money because their main asset is a worthless piece of paper from a bankrupt subsidiary." She called Arthur Anderson 3 times. She left messages that were increasingly urgent. "You must withdraw your audit opinion. You are signing off on a lie." Silence was the only answer. The accounting giant, perhaps blinded by their own fees or a misplaced trust in Kratz's reputation, ignored the warning. It was a failure that would cost them their own existence in the years to come. Chapter 6. The Dust Settles. In August 1999, the mirage finally evaporated. The state of Arizona, armed with the testimonies of Kyle Tresh and the accountants, forced the BFA to stop selling its stewardship notes. The collapse was instantaneous. 3 months later, the foundation filed for bankruptcy. The 11,000 investors, many of them seniors, who had entrusted their entire lives to the church, woke up to find they were holding empty promises. The $600 million owed was backed by barely $250 million in assets, most of it tied up in land that no one wanted to buy at fire sale prices. For Bill and Pat Anderson, the news was a death sentence for their retirement. Bill, a man who had worked 40 years to earn his peace, couldn't stop moving. He went into his garage and carved wooden Uncle Sam lawn ornaments, working half the night to try and claw back the $200,000 they had lost. He couldn't sleep. Pat, their neighbors would say, he was working too hard and worrying too much. Within 2 weeks, Bill suffered to heart attacks. He died shortly after, his body giving out under the weight of the betrayal. Pat was left alone, working as a caretaker for others to pay the bills her safe investment should have covered. Robert Shaw had to tell his daughter that the college fund was gone. He sold his home and took a job at a rental car agency, washing cars in the Phoenix sun. The embarrassment was a physical pain in his chest. I didn't know how to tell her. He recalled, I felt like a failure because I believed a man in a suit who quoted the Bible. Part 2, The Edgewater Healer. Chapter 7, The Bedside Manor. While Phoenix was reeling, Chicago was experiencing its own betrayal of trust. Dr. Ronald Michaels was a fixture in the Edgewater neighborhood. He was the house call doctor, the man who remembered your birthday and knew how you liked your tea. He focused on the elderly patients who often felt invisible to the rest of the world. He would spend an hour in their cramped apartments, listening to their stories. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly the kindest man in the medical profession. You're a saint, Dr. Michaels, Mrs. Goldberg would say as he trimmed her thick toenails. Not many doctors care about old feet like mine. Michaels would smile, a warm, practiced expression. Everyone deserves to walk without pain, Martha. But beneath this saintly exterior, Michaels was a man in freefall. His marriage had collapsed. His Lincolnwood home was gone. And he was sinking into a pit of prescription drug abuse and alcoholism. He viewed his patients not as people, but as billing codes. To fuel his addiction and his desperate need for cash, he began to write fiction in the form of Medicare claims. Chapter 8: The Beneficiary of Greed. Charles Labosco was 80 years old, a man whose body was failing, but whose mind was still sharp enough to recognize a payday. He was Michaels' star patient and his silent partner. Michaels would visit Labosco and perform simple podiatric maintenance. Then he would return to his office and bill Medicare for complex surgeries. 1, then 2, then 10. Over 7 years, Michaels billed Medicare for 351 surgeries on Labosco's feet. It's easy. Charlie, Michaels had told him during one visit, handing him a kickback check. Medicare has plenty of money. They won't miss a few thousand. You just sign these forms and we'll both be comfortable. To the government, Labosco's feet were the most operated on appendages in medical history. To Michaels, they were the fountain of youth for his bank account. Between 1994 and 2001, Michaels billed over $1.7 million, making him the highest paid podiatrist in Illinois. But the government was finally watching. Pete Tyler, an investigator for the Office of Inspector General, started noticing the anomalies. Nobody has 10 surgeries in a month on their toes, Tyler told his team, unless they're growing new feet every week. Chapter 9: The Icooners. Joyce Brannon was 54, a former intensive care unit nurse who now lived in the basement of the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church. She was the caretaker, a woman who found peace in the quiet holiness of the sanctuary. She was also a patient of Dr. Michaels, but unlike many of his other targets, Joyce wasn't confused. She had spent decades in hospitals. She knew what a surgical tray looked like. When Pete Tyler and Agent Renee Reyes arrived at her door in September 2001, Joyce invited them in. She looked at the billing records they presented. 70 surgeries on her feet. Honey, Joyce said, her voice clear and resonant. I'm a nurse. I know what surgery is. Dr. Michaels comes here. We have a nice talk. He clips my nails, and he leaves. He has never, not once, performed a surgery on me. She was the golden witness. She was the one who wouldn't be bullied or bribed. When Maikos realized the feds had talked to her, he panicked. He called her, his voice cracking with a manufactured desperation. "Joyce, I have family at home. Don't you care what happens to me? If you testify, I'll lose everything." Joyce's response was a testament to her character. "You should have thought about that before you did this. Ron, this is wrong. I will tell the truth." Chapter 10, The Chilling Wire. The feds were getting closer. They tapped Maikos' cell phone, listening as the doctor's world narrowed to a pinprick of paranoia. They heard a call between Maikos and Charles Labosco, a nervous, whispered conversation that confirmed their worst suspicions. They're asking questions. "Ron," Labosco whispered, "the man from the government called me." Maikos' voice was a ragged edge of panic and alcohol. "Just stick to the script. Charlie, tell them about the tiny incisions. Tell them you're satisfied. Don't let them in." But Maikos was no longer just worried about Labosco. He was obsessed with Joyce Brannon. His Palm Pilot was filled with detailed notes on every agent who interviewed him and every patient who betrayed him. He rated the interviews like movie reviews. Beside Joyce Brannon's name, he wrote, "Interview went poorly." Chapter 11, The Sunday Sacrifice. On Sunday, January 27th, 2002, the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church was quiet. The morning service had ended, and the sanctuary was empty. Joyce Brannon was in her basement apartment, likely relaxing after a day of service. Maikos had been scouting the church. He had the Sunday service schedule written on a notepad in his car. He had a .22 caliber revolver that he had retrieved from police storage just 3 days earlier after renewing his license. He entered the basement. He didn't come to heal. He came to silence the only witness he couldn't control. Joyce was sitting in a chair, facing the window. She never saw him. He shot her 6 times. In the back. In the head. Once at point-blank range. He thought he had silenced the truth. He thought that without Joyce Brannon, the fraud case would crumble. He was wrong. In death, Joyce's testimony recorded in the agent's notes, and her unwavering integrity became even more powerful. Part 3, The Gavel and the Ghost. Chapter 12, Paper Mountains. The trial of William Kratz and Tom Verbinski in Phoenix was a masterclass in accounting forensics. It lasted 10 months, the longest in Arizona history. Over 1 million pages of documents were entered into evidence, a paper mountain that detailed every sham sale and every hidden loss. Kratz sat at the defense table, his hair whiter now, his face still holding that expression of pained righteousness. If the state hadn't shut us down, his lawyers argued, everyone would have been paid. The real estate market recovered. The assets are worth millions now. The state killed the BFA, not Kratz, but the prosecution, led by attorneys who had spent years tracing the money, focused on the moment of the lie. It doesn't matter if the land was worth $1 billion in 2006. They argued. What matters is that in 1996, you told investors you were profitable when you were losing millions. You lied to get their money. That is the crime. The jury found them guilty of fraud and illegally conducting an enterprise. Kratz was sentenced to 8 years, Grabinski to 6. As they were led away, the victims watched from the gallery broken, but finally vindicated. Chapter 13, The Highest Price. In Chicago, the case against Dr. Ronald Michos was equally brutal. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sean Berkowitz presented the evidence, the Palm Pilot, the shell casing in Michos's car, the box of ammunition, and the motive. The defense tried to paint him as a broken man, a victim of depression, but the jury saw the preparation. They saw the cold, clinical way he had eliminated his golden witness. He had treated a human life as just another line item to be erased. The verdict for murder was swift. The sentence, death. Michos was transported to the federal death row in Terre Haute, Indiana. He sits there today, a man who once healed feet now waiting for his own journey to end. Chapter 14, The Shadows of Faith. Years after the cell doors slammed shut, the echoes of the betrayal still lingered. For the survivors of the BFA collapse, The trauma wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. Robert Shaw eventually found a small measure of peace, but he never returned to a Southern Baptist church. He began attending a small, non-denominational congregation, one where the financial statements were posted on the bulletin board every month. "I still love God," he told his daughter at her graduation, "but I've learned that men who speak for him are still just men, and some men are wolves." In Chicago, the Bethany Evangelical Lutheran Church underwent a transformation. The basement where Joyce Brannon lived was converted into a community center for the elderly, the very people Dr. Michaels had preyed upon. A portrait of Joyce hangs in the hallway, her ICU nurse's cap visible in the corner of the frame. She is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, with an honesty that even a bullet couldn't kill. Chapter 15, The Architect's Lament. William Kratz, in the quiet of his prison cell, often stared at the barren Arizona sky through the narrow slit of his window. He spent his days writing long, rambling letters to the board members he once dominated, still insisting that his vision was sound. The market corrected just as I said it would. He wrote to Tom Verbinski, who was in a different facility. "We were right, Tom. The world just wasn't ready for a kingdom built on real estate." He never mentioned Bill Anderson. He never mentioned the seniors who were forced back into the workforce in their late 70s. In his mind, they were just necessary casualties in a holy war. He had traded his soul for a balance sheet, and in the end, both were empty. Epilogue: The bitter harvest. The desert sun still rises over Phoenix, and the winter winds still howl through the streets of Chicago. But for the victims of Kratz and Michaels, the world is forever changed. Pat Anderson still visits Bill's grave every Sunday. She brings flowers and tells him about their grandchildren. She doesn't go to the Baptist church anymore. "I still believe in God," she says, her voice steady. "But I don't believe in men who say they speak for him while they're looking at my checkbook." The Arthur Anderson accounting firm, once the bastion of financial integrity, vanished from the earth shortly after the BFA collapse. its reputation incinerated by the scandals of Enron and the Baptist Foundation. It was a fitting end for a giant that had looked the other way. Greed is a hungry god. It demands everything your integrity, your friends, and eventually your soul. And it always, always leaves the faithful to pay the bill. The end.